What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices walks onto a talk show stage, only to be met with accusations, disrespect, and a complete disregard for basic courtesy? In just 39 seconds of one explosive comment, Sonny Hostin would ignite a confrontation that would end with Morgan Freeman doing something he has never done in his entire career, walking off a live television set. The View's studio lights were bright that morning as the panel settled into their seats. Whoopi Goldberg sat at the center, flanked by Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sonny Hostin. The audience buzzed with excitement. Morgan Freeman was the guest, a man whose voice alone commands respect, whose career spans decades of excellence, whose very presence elevates any room he enters. He walked out to thunderous applause, his signature calm demeanor intact, that gentle smile crossing his face as he waved to the crowd. He took his seat across from the panel, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. Whoopi started with the softball questions, asking about his latest project, his thoughts on the film industry, the usual talk show pleasantries that ease a guest into the conversation. Morgan answered each question with thoughtfulness and grace. He spoke about his passion for storytelling, about the responsibility artists have to their craft, about the younger generation of actors he admired. The audience hung on every word. This was Morgan Freeman at his finest, wise, eloquent, genuine. But then Sonny Hostin leaned forward. "I want to shift gears here," she said, her tone changing. "I want to talk about something that I think our audience needs to hear from you directly." Morgan nodded politely. "Of course. You have been in this industry for a very long time," Sonny continued, "and I think it is fair to say that you have benefited tremendously from it. But what I want to know is, do you feel any sense of responsibility for the fact that your generation, your peers, essentially gatekept opportunities from women and people of color for decades?" The air in the studio shifted. You could feel it. The other panelists exchanged quick glances. Sarah Haynes's eyes widened slightly. Joy Behar tilted her head, uncertain where this was going. Even Whoopi, typically unflappable, seemed caught off guard. Morgan Freeman paused. He took a breath, clearly processing the question, trying to give it the thoughtful response it might deserve despite its loaded nature. "Well," he began carefully, "I think the industry has certainly evolved. And yes, there were systemic issues that many of us have worked to address. But I would not characterize my career or my generation in such broad strokes. Many of us fought very hard to open doors, to create opportunities where there were none. But did you fight hard enough?" Sonny shot back immediately. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you and your contemporaries were pretty comfortable collecting your paychecks, while the rest of us had to fight tooth and nail just to get a seat at the table." The audience was silent now. This was not a conversation. This was an ambush. Morgan's expression remained calm, but you could see something flicker in his eyes. "I think that is a rather unfair characterization," he said, his voice still measured. "I have spent my entire career trying to do work that matters, that represents people authentically, that challenges stereotypes rather than reinforces them." "Have you, though?" Sonny pressed. "Because I have watched a lot of your films, and I have to say, I see a lot of Morgan Freeman playing the wise mentor, the magical helper, the guy who exists to make the white protagonist feel good about themselves. Is not that just another form of gatekeeping? You playing it safe so you could stay employed?" Joy Behar interjected, sensing the tension spiraling. "Sonny, I think Morgan has had an incredible career with a lot of range. I mean, Shawshank Redemption alone." "I am not talking about Shawshank," Sonny interrupted, not even looking at Joy. Her focus was locked on Morgan. "I am talking about a pattern. I am talking about choices. And I think Morgan owes it to this audience to be honest about whether he prioritized his own comfort over real change." Morgan Freeman sat back slightly. His jaw tightened, just barely, but enough to notice. "Miss Hostin," he said, and the formality of it cut through the air, "I have never prioritized comfort. I have taken roles that challenged me, that scared me, that pushed boundaries. I have worked with directors and writers of every background. I have mentored young actors. I have funded scholarships. I have used my platform to speak on issues that matter. So I would appreciate it if you did not sit here and reduce my entire life's work to some kind of self-serving calculation, the audience murmured. Some applause started to build, but Sunny spoke over it. See, this is the problem, she said, her voice rising. The minute someone asks you to examine your privilege, you get defensive. You make it about yourself. You cannot even have an honest conversation about the harm that was done. What harm did I do? Morgan asked, his voice still controlled, but with an edge now. Please, tell me specifically, what harm did I, Morgan Freeman, personally do to you or anyone else? It is not about you personally, Sunny said, exasperated. It is about the system. It is about complicity. It is about the fact that you had power, and you did not use it the way you should have. How do you know what I did or did not do? Morgan replied, leaning forward now. How do you know what conversations I had behind closed doors? What projects I fought for? What battles I picked? You sit here with your assumptions and your accusations, and you do not know anything about my life, my choices, or my struggles. Whoopi tried to step in. Okay, let us take a breath here. I think we all... No, Whoopi, Morgan said, holding up a hand but keeping his eyes on Sunny. Let her finish. She clearly has something she wants to say to me. So say it. Get it all out. Sunny did not hesitate. Fine. I think you represent a generation of actors who were so grateful just to be in the room that you forgot to kick the door open for the people behind you. I think you played roles that made white audiences comfortable instead of roles that challenged them. And I think now, when people like me ask you to reckon with that, you hide behind your accolades instead of taking accountability. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Alyssa Farah Griffin stared down at her note card, frozen. Joy Behar opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure what to possibly say. Morgan Freeman stood up, not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, deliberately, with the dignity of a man who had heard enough. I came here today as a courtesy, he said, his voice quiet but powerful. I came here to talk about my work, to connect with people who might appreciate it, to have a conversation. But I will not sit here and be disrespected. I will not be lectured by someone who has decided, without knowing me, that I am the enemy. You want to talk about privilege? You are sitting on a national television show, being paid handsomely to share your opinions, and you are using that platform to tear down someone who has spent 50 years trying to do good work. That is your privilege, Miss Hostin, and I want no part of it. He turned to Whoopi. Whoopi, you are a friend, and I respect you enormously, but I cannot stay here. Whoopi stood up quickly. Morgan, please, let us just... No, he said gently, but firmly. I am not going to give her the satisfaction of continuing this. I am not going to let this turn into a spectacle. He looked at the audience, many of whom were watching with wide eyes, some with their hands over their mouths in shock. Thank you all for having me, he said to them, his voice warm again. I hope you continue to enjoy stories that move you, challenge you, and bring you together. That is all I have ever tried to do. And then he walked, not stormed, not fled, walked. With his head high, his shoulders square, every inch the man whose voice has narrated the human experience itself. The cameras stayed on him as he crossed the stage. The audience did not know whether to applaud or stay silent, so they did a bit of both, a confused smattering of claps mixed with stunned quiet. Sunny Hostin sat frozen in her chair, her mouth slightly open, clearly not expecting this outcome. Joy Behar leaned over and whispered something to her, but Sunny did not respond. Sarah Haynes had her hand on her forehead, shaking her head slightly. Alyssa looked at Whoopi as if waiting for instructions on what to do next. Whoopi, ever the professional, turned back to the camera. "We are going to take a quick break," she said, her voice tight. "We will be right back." But the damage was done. As the show cut to commercial, the panelists sat in uncomfortable silence. Sunny finally spoke, her voice defensive. "I was just asking legitimate questions." "You ambushed him," Joy said flatly. "That was not an interview. That was a prosecution." "He could have answered the questions," Sunny shot back. "He chose to walk off." "Because you gave him no choice," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "You were not listening to him. You were just waiting for your next chance to attack." "I was holding him accountable," Sunny insisted. "No," Whoopi said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "You were grandstanding. There is a difference." Alyssa finally spoke up. "I think we need to address this when we come back. The audience deserves an explanation." But when they came back from commercial, there was no apology. There was no real acknowledgement of what had just happened beyond Whoopi saying, "As you saw, our guest Morgan Freeman decided to leave. We respect his decision, and we are going to move on to our next segment." Move on they did, but the audience had not moved on. Social media had not moved on. The world had not moved on. Because what they had witnessed was not just a walk-off. It was a moment of clarity. A moment where a man who had spent his entire life conducting himself with grace and professionalism decided that there were some lines he would not allow to be crossed. Morgan Freeman did not owe Sunny Hostin an explanation of his life's work. He did not owe her a defense of every choice he made in a career that began before she was born. He did not owe her the performance of contrition she seemed to expect. What he gave her instead was something more valuable, a lesson in dignity. He showed that you do not have to engage with bad faith. You do not have to subject yourself to disrespect in the name of dialogue. You do not have to sit there and be berated just because someone has a microphone and an agenda. The conversations Sunny tried to have might have been worth having in a different context, with different framing, with actual respect and curiosity instead of accusation and judgment. But that is not what she offered. She offered a courtroom where she was judge, jury, and executioner, and Morgan Freeman was expected to simply accept his sentence. He refused. And in refusing, he reminded everyone watching what self-respect looks like, what boundaries look like, what happens when you decide that your dignity is not negotiable. Sunny Hostin wanted to make a point. She wanted to confront a legend, to challenge him, to make herself look brave and uncompromising in front of her audience. But what she actually did was reveal the difference between criticism and cruelty, between accountability and ambush, between someone who wants answers and someone who just wants to be right. Morgan Freeman walked off that stage, and he took with him the moral high ground. He took with him the respect of millions of people who watched and thought, "Good for him." He took with him the knowledge that he had not compromised himself, had not debased himself, had not played along with a game designed to humiliate him. The View panelists sat there after he left, trying to regain their composure, trying to move forward with the show. But you could see it on their faces. Joy knew it had gone too far. Sarah knew it had gone too far. Even Alyssa, the newest member of the panel, knew it had gone too far. Only Sunny seemed unable or unwilling to see it. She sat there, defensive, justified in her own mind, convinced that she had done nothing wrong, that she had simply asked tough questions, that Morgan Freeman was the one who could not handle it. But the audience knew better. They knew what they had seen. They had watched a woman with a platform use it not to enlighten or educate, but to attack. They had watched her mistake aggression for courage, confrontation for conversation. They had watched her treat a guest, a human being, like an avatar for every frustration she had with an entire industry, an entire generation, an entire system. And they had watched that guest, that human being, decide he deserved better. Because he did. The segment that was supposed to last 15 minutes ended in less than 10. The conversation that was supposed to showcase Sunny's fearlessness instead showcased her inability to distinguish between holding power accountable and simply wielding power carelessly. Morgan Freeman has been interviewed thousands of times. He has faced tough questions, challenging moments, difficult conversations. He has navigated an industry that was not built for him, that did not want him, that tried to limit him at every turn. And he has done it all with grace. But grace does not mean submission. Grace does not mean allowing yourself to be mistreated. Grace does not mean sitting silently while someone who has decided you are guilty demands that you prove your innocence. Grace, as Morgan Freeman showed that day, can also mean knowing when to walk away. The audience understood it. The viewers at home understood it. Even some of the panelists understood it. Sunny Hostin, sitting in her chair as the show moved on to lighter topics, seemed to be the only one who did not. She had wanted a moment. She got one. Just not the one she intended. She had wanted to be remembered as the person who held Morgan Freeman accountable. Instead, she would be remembered as the person who disrespected him so thoroughly that he had no choice but to leave. And Morgan Freeman, who had walked onto that stage as a respected actor and walked off as something more, had shown the world that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in your own diminishment. He did not raise his voice. He did not insult anyone. He did not make a scene. He just stood up, said his piece, and left. And in doing so, he won. Not because he got the last word, not because he made Sunny look bad, but because he refused to let anyone, no matter their platform, their position, or their perceived righteousness, treat him as anything less than he is. A man of integrity, a man of principle, a man who knows his worth. And no talk show host, no matter how convinced of their own moral authority, could take that away from him. That is what happens when respect is demanded but not given. When questions become accusations. When conversation becomes confrontation. That is what happens when someone mistakes a guest appearance for a target practice. That is what happens in just 39 seconds of one careless, disrespectful comment. Someone who has spent a lifetime earning respect decides they will not spend one more second being disrespected, and they walk away, just like Morgan Freeman did.